Okay, we ready? Should we wait a couple of minutes? Ray, we ready? Yeah? Yeah, good. Hi, good evening, everyone. Thank you for coming today at our Stop Trafficking event. We were expecting a few more people, so I'm sure they'll arrive as and when. My name is Dr. Saf Buxy, and I'm part of the board here with this wonderful organisation. We're all volunteers here. We all do this out of the goodness of our hearts because it's a problem. There's a massive, massive problem out there. Vulnerable individuals, and that includes young ladies, girls, boys, getting abducted and getting sold for sex trafficking, modern day slavery. It's a massive problem out there, and it's global. It's global. And Sheikh Ramsey, who's the founder of his organisation, saw that it's a massive, massive problem, and we need to do something about it. I'm very, very unwell today. I've been very sick, but I'm still here today because I feel that the show must go on. This is nothing. My health today is nothing compared to what these poor kids, children, wives, mothers, even men who are vulnerable are going through on a daily basis. Imagine, just imagine a little girl, 5, 6 years old, getting abducted by a perpetrator and then being sold again and again and again. What does that do to her mentally? I'm not even going to start talking about the physical implications from this. I'm a psychotherapist, and I look after the mental health side of this organisation, but also to try and work as a collective with a wonderful team we have here. And yes, I must stress, we are all volunteers. And we want to try and grow this team because we can only work in communion to make it a success and to try and make a difference. At the moment, it's about raising awareness and educating as many people in the world to spot signs, and that's what we're here about today. So I'm not going to do a lot of talking, and we do have a few speakers, and we are going to keep that side of it brief today because this is more of an interactive session where we're going to give you a couple of scenarios, and we want you to identify what these scenarios are about and how we can best tackle them and how we can try and be aware of what's going on. So without further ado, welcome again. So these are the objectives of today, is to gain a deeper understanding, it's all there, of what human trafficking and modern day slavery is. To develop the ability to identify victims and potential victims by using the indicators learned, and we'll be teaching you this. And to be fair, it's not rocket science, okay? When you actually know what the signs are, you know what to look for, you will see it straight away. Wherever I go now, I'm looking at different facial expressions, body language, mannerisms, being controlled by someone. I'm looking at all these things. Just little things like this we can do to try and make a difference. And then we're going to put your skills to the test with our scenarios, like I mentioned. So what is human trafficking? Trafficking in human beings shall mean the recruitment, transportation, transfer, harbouring or receipt of persons by means of the threat or use of force or other forms of coercion, of abduction, of fraud, of deception, of the abuse of power, or a position of vulnerability, or the giving or receiving of payments, or control over another person for the purpose of exploitation. Recruitment, transportation, transfer, harbouring, receipt, threat, use of force, other forms of coercion, abduction, which is I've already mentioned, fraud, deception, abuse of power, and abuse of vulnerability. Who's vulnerable? Who's vulnerable? People who've come from places of conflict, young people, people who are entrapped in poverty, people who are looking for a better life, people who are, there's so many people who are vulnerable, people who are sold the fantasy that you can have this, you can have this, you can have this. And because they're so desperate, they buy into that fantasy innocently. And next thing, they're being sold. Modern day slavery, now that's a different definition, even though they come hand in hand. And this term encompasses a range of exploitative practices where individuals are subjected to various forms of coercion, control, and exploitation. Modern day slavery refers to the situations where people are deprived of their freedom and forced to work under duress, often without proper compensation or the ability to leave the situation. People are promised a dream to come to this country, and people are obtaining visas in illegal fashion and coming to this country and being promised work, promised a life, promised a dream. But what happens instead is they are enslaved and they are forced to do the work that they weren't promised. And we're talking people in car washes, we're talking people in restaurants, just to mention a couple of places. I went to a restaurant once and I went downstairs to the gents and I saw a room. And in that room I saw, and this is just before we get it, I just saw all these little mattresses in that room. And already that, the alarm bells are ringing. That it feels like there's staff working there and sleeping there. And the room was very cramped and there was about 10 mattresses. Little signs like that. Okay, so human trafficking, you've got the act, you've got the means, and you've got the purpose. We've talked about the act, the recruitment, the transfer, the transportation, the harbouring, and the receipt. Means, threat or use of force. Coercion, abduction, fraud, deception, abuse of power. Bit of a topical subject, power. What you'll find that people in the place of power sometimes manipulate and take advantage of people below them. And I'm not here to ridicule anyone, but we're talking sometimes people with a lot of money, people who are overseeing big corporations, people involved in politics, people involved in royalty around the world, the police in some countries, very corrupt countries. These are people with power that we're supposed to go to trust, but they use that power and they use that money to manipulate the vulnerable, and they bring them in. Where you go to someone to trust, and because you respect them, because of what they've achieved and what they do, the innocent, the vulnerable get drawn in, and that's it. They have a life of hell. And that's why we're here, to try and help reduce that and make people aware. And this is what they do: sexual exploitation, forced labour, slavery, domestic servitude, organ harvesting, very common in South Asia. Forced criminality. Don't know if you're aware of county lines. County lines is where people from all over the country come to areas, estates, for example, in South London, just to give an example, and entice the young to sell drugs with them. And they'll get their new trainers. They'll get their new garms. They force them into that lifestyle. That if you do this for us, you'll have these new trainers. You'll have this much money. And they use these little youngsters to sell the drugs on their behalf. And if they don't, the family's at risk, they're at risk, and they're part of it now. And they want to be part of the team. They want to, they like this gangster life. And that's how they get manipulated by these people. That's called county lines. So I'm not going to carry on, but everything's up there, and we can obviously send you slides thereafter. There's a lot to go through, so I'm going to go through it because this is more of an interactive session as opposed to a presentation per se. Slavery, servitude, and forced labour. You've got the means on the left and the purpose, which we very similar to human trafficking and modern day slavery. So I'll go for that. Right, forms of human trafficking and modern day slavery. I want you to shout out, if you may, different forms of human trafficking and modern day slavery that you might think would come on this list. I've got one up there for you: forced labour. Can anyone just shout out something that you may think is a form of human trafficking or modern day slavery? So one is forced labour. We've had a little bit of discussion, but just shout it out.
Sex industry.
Sorry?
Sex industry.
Sex industry. Anything else? yeah. Child labour, domestic servitude, sex trafficking, debt bondage, criminal exploitation, which we just spoke about very briefly, forced marriages, still common to this day. In this day and age, it's still common. It's mind-boggling, it really is. Forced marriages, honour killing, it still goes on in this country. In this country. Refuge and migrant exploitation. I don't know what the stat was that, but from the Ukraine war, when they had people come over, I think in the first week, nearly 200 women and children went missing. Went missing in the first week of them coming into this country. And I know these stats are higher now, but that was the restaurant and catering industry. It's funny because the people working there thinking, yes, great, I'm getting cash in hand, everything's great, nothing has to be declared, but they're working 10, 15, 20 hours a day. They're sleeping in that environment. Cockroaches, I mean, the state of these places, the place where I told you about with the mattresses, it's disgusting. The restaurant looks lovely. The restaurant looks beautiful. You go downstairs where the workers sleep after they've finished work, and what are they getting paid? Peanuts. And they're forced to do it, otherwise you're illegal in this country. You'll get deported back. All these threats, passports are taken away from them. They have no freedom. Organ trafficking, very, very common in South Asia. And when I laugh, I'm laughing in disgust. There's medical professionals, I can't comment about this country, but in various parts of South Asia, where they take someone for surgery when there's no need for surgery, and when they're under anaesthetic, they're taking out organs to sell. Smuggling or trafficking. These are some myths, some truths, and I want you to have a look at them. We'll go with smuggling, a specific service if transportation is provided to the individual. If you look at trafficking, it says individual exploited by the trafficker by some means of control. Voluntary and short-term relationship between smuggler and smugglers normally ends on arrival. Not always the case, and that's smuggling. Longer-term relationship where the victim is trafficked for the purpose of exploitation. Individual makes a one-off payment, smuggling. Ongoing payments between the victim and trafficker as a result of exploitation. Again, that's where that debt bondage comes in. It's like, okay, we've got you here, okay? We've paid for you to come in this country. You've got to pay back the debt now because we're giving you this life. And before you know it, the young innocent girl, lady, or young innocent lady who's come here, potential modelling work, is now working in a brothel, being forced to sell her body for sex. And the money doesn't even go to her, regardless. It goes to the debt. It goes to the debt. And if she doesn't do it, where's she going to go? The passport's confiscated. The family back home are at risk. It's a situation where their hands are tied. They're completely powerless. Can you imagine what they're going through? Imagine what a young girl is going through. I'm saying girls and ladies. I mean, it happens to boys as well, males as well. But if you've got a sister, if you've got a mother, if you've got a daughter, it could happen to anyone. I think we might see a video later where they show an abduction so quickly in a shopping car park, in a shopping centre, at the airports in some countries. Quick, before you know it's it. And they will never see their child again. And the child will have a life of manipulation, a life of struggle. It's just heartbreaking. Always across the international border, smuggling, not always the case. Victim may be trafficked internally, not necessarily across a border. That's trafficking. Individual entry contravenes immigration law. Smuggling, victims' entry is not necessarily contrary to the immigration law. Violation of state sovereignty and violation of victims' rights and criminal offence against victim. Slavery, servitude, forced labour. Negative obligation not to permit certain treatment. Positive obligation upon the state to put in system to prevent exploitation and to protect victims as soon as credible suspicion arises that the person has been a victim. We'll talk about that more later. Article 4, European Convention on Human Rights. No one, and we've got someone who's going to be speaking about human rights later and human dignity as well, no one shall be held in slavery or servitude. No one shall be required to perform forced or compulsory labour. Labour, any service, not just manual labour. Examine any apparent consent carefully. Aggravated forms, servitude and slavery. All work or service which is exacted from the person under the menace of any penalty and for which the said person has not offered himself voluntarily. Article 2, UN Convention concerning forced labour and compulsory labour. This, guys, I want you to listen carefully, please, because these are general indicators, and this you'll be tested on in a bit. Some will be quite self-explanatory, but I want to go through it. Distrustful of authorities. You may come across someone somewhere who doesn't have much trust in people of high places because they've probably been manipulated. You can see signs like this. It's a difficult one when you see a parent-like figure in a child. One hand you might think, okay, that's the parent telling the child off, but there's a difference with the child's face. And we're trying to identify this. We're not asking you to go and do it yourself. No, DIY is a no-no. But just spot the signs. And if you are worried, any concern, call the police. Fear or anxiety. Psychological trauma. That's something that I'm very strong about. And I've got patients I see on a regular basis, not trafficking per se, but people who have experienced trauma. And let me tell you about trauma. Trauma is not about the event itself. It's the experience, what they've experienced from the event. That's more to do with trauma, secondary trauma. Willingness, control. You can see that. You can see control. I went to a restaurant the other day, and the way the manager was talking to the waiter was like disgusting. That might ring some alarm bells, I don't know. Location. Living in the same location. People coming in and out of the same location. Is there something untoward? Is there sex trafficking going on in there? Movement. Are women being moved by a taxi going to another place, they're bringing back again? Things like this. It could be happening next door to where you live. Documentation, confiscating documentation. They have no ID, no passport, they don't have anything. Means of control, the threat of or actual use of force against the victim. The threat or actual use of force against the family members, which is what I said, whether it's county lines or whether it's someone who's come from abroad. They're subservient to the perpetrators because they're worried about the family. Withholding travel immigration documents, passports and whatnot, visas, and exploitation of the vulnerabilities. Psychological health, blackmail, ritual oaths, which still goes on, it's just mind-boggling. Threats or rejection or disapproval by family, more to do with honour killing and forced marriages. Exploitation of the vulnerabilities, threats of report to police or immigration enforcement. And this is where they get you. When they've got you and the perpetrator is saying that if you do this, this or this, we're going to hand you into the police or we're going to go to the immigration. The people that you want to trust, they're saying that against you if you don't do what they say. Powerless. Stockholm Syndrome, I don't know if you know what that is when you fall in love with the perpetrator. It usually happens after a certain period of time. But what we find is people who've been abducted or have been enslaved or who have been in an environment for a certain length of time, it becomes normal to them. It's normalized. And they actually expect it, especially if it's a young child. You've seen these films, you know about these stories where kids been abducted at 5, 6, 7 years old, and 20 years later, 30 years later, they're still there and haven't been found. Still there and haven't been found, and they're now in love with the perpetrator. That's called Stockholm Syndrome. And not recognizing themselves as a victim. Oh, I deserve it. No problem. It's fine. This is my life now. This is what I do. Yeah, this was the plan for me. They believe in what they're doing. And it all started from manipulation. Indicators of sexual exploitation. As I mentioned, sleeping on work premises. Movement of individuals between brothels, which is, I've spoken about that already. Keep an eye when you see cars coming with girls coming in, taxi drivers coming back again, different girls. You can see it. It may be happening to you next door. Only being able to speak sexual words, especially people from abroad who can't speak English, but the only words they seem to be able to speak are sexually focused. That should be a sign. Limited amounts of clothing or only sexual clothing. Marks indicating ownership. Sex trafficking is very big on marking the victim. Where would these marks be seen? Sometimes on the neck, sometimes on the hand. It's a form of possession that you're mine. And when I mean marks, I mean tattoos. You know, like they do to the cows. Yeah, they stamp the cows. Health symptoms, including sexual health issues. I like to see a lot of patients like that. And I always ask the question, are you okay? Are you being forced to do something? Indicators of coercion. Like forced labour, I'm going to go from, you can just read it, but I think we've mentioned quite a few of these things. Excessive wage reductions, withholding the wages, common. Financial penalties and deductions, poor living conditions, which we spoke about. Excessive working days and long hours, which we spoke about. Deceiving nature of the job, location or employer. And obviously dodgy documentation. We spoke about county lines, indicators of criminal exploitation, carrying and selling drugs. Children of the same nationality or ethnicity who move in groups with only a few adults. You see that in many estates in London, many estates. Unaccompanied minors who have been found by an adult of the same nationality or ethnicity. Because they trust them, and then they draw them in. Indicators for cannabis cultivation, you'll smell this pungent smell. There'll be special lighting going on. There's signs that you can look out for. Domestic servitude, very quickly. Living with and working for a family in a private home or place of accommodation. Not eating with the rest of the family. Yeah? Treated like slaves. No private sleeping place. Sleeping in the kitchen. Living room. We give you this job. You've come for this job. You sleep there. No private space. Forced to work. Right. Trauma-informed approach is a very special way of working with people who are victims of sex trafficking and human trafficking. You've got to treat them as a victim and not someone who's done a crime, even though the act itself, for example, sex work, is perceived to be a crime in the eyes of the law, and it is. But when they've been trafficked unwillingly and they've been forced to do that work, they are the victims. Be able to recognize signs of trauma. You can tell by the face, by the mannerisms, by the body language. Create a safe, calm, and consistent environment when they come to us. Obviously, I'm a man, and they still might be uncomfortable, so we are trying to look for female volunteers who are studying psychology or in the field of psychology to be there for them, that they're safe now. They've got nothing to worry about. We're here to help you. Make the potential victim feel you have time to listen. We don't know what they've been through and how long they've been through that. They're not going to trust you. They're not going to trust us. So we've got to listen to what they've got to say. empower them to make their own decisions, focus on their needs now and in the future, avoid re-traumatizing. Now, this is a difficult one because they don't want to relive that, but sometimes when I'm doing therapy, if they choose to talk about it, of course, I'll listen to it, but we're trying to get a solution-focused attitude. Right, I want you to say if it's true or false, please, yeah? Myth busting, just shout it out. Okay, human trafficking can involve the act of movement of the victim across international borders for the purpose of exploitation. Is that true or false?
True.
Good. Means of control can be subtle and psychological in nature and may involve exploitation of an individual's vulnerability, such as owing to a learning disability. True or false? Check. Modern slavery does not include a situation where a family member forces another family member, when a family member forces another family member, such as a spouse or sibling, to do domestic work. False. And the last one, if an individual voluntarily pays to be smuggled across a border, they do not later become a victim of trafficking by virtue of being exploited for labour upon their arrival. Is that true or false? False. I'll read it again. If an individual voluntarily pays to be smuggled, take the money. Yeah? Get me across. And that's it. The relationship over. Right. That's my bit done. I'm sorry I rushed it through a little bit. As I say, I am under the weather, but this is so important to us. It's so important to get as many of you involved so we can try and make a difference. Raise awareness. And this is the year we want to start doing things. This is the year we want to make a proper difference. So thank you very much for listening to me. We've got some wonderful speakers to speak about that we're working in collaboration with. And yeah, second to none, I would like to call Rihanna to speak about the scale of the problem. Thank you, guys, and let's do this together. Yeah? Thank you.